On today's episode, we'll be talking more about some of the bizarre things that people have experienced in the forest, as well as some who believe that they almost didn't make it back. These stories and more on this episode of Paranormal Mysteries. Welcome to the show, and thank you again for joining me. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. Before we start, I'd like to remind all of you how much I appreciate your support. And if you enjoy the show, please remember to subscribe, share, and review the podcast. And if you'd like to support us even further by becoming a patron or by donating, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. Remember that your support in any form helps to make the show possible. And if you've encountered the paranormal and would like to share your story, please email me at paranormalmysteriesPodcast@gmail.com. All experiences, no matter how big or small they are always welcome. In episodes 66 and 88, I discussed some of the odd phenomena that seems to be taking place in and around wilderness areas throughout the world. I typically refer to these reports as almost missing, because the witnesses almost always experience a sense of disorientation and a feeling as if they are being led off into the forest by an unknown source. It's a phenomenon that's so widespread that people all over the world claim to have experienced it, and if I had to pick a favorite paranormal topic, these phenomena would definitely be in my top 10. But to be clear, I don't take this topic lightly, and it heavily weighs on my mind whenever I'm backpacking or camping. There have been thousands of people that have gone missing without a trace under extremely odd circumstances, and I can't help but wonder what they would have to report if they were ever able to return, and my thoughts and prayers go out to those individuals and their families. Thankfully, though, tonight's stories involve people that did make it back, and the first few reports come from an article by Brent Swancer on Mysterious Universe, as well as Reddit, and involve some very unsettling encounters. And here are the articles. This first strange account comes from a Reddit poster called Malamute Owner 77, who lives at the coastal resort town of Bournemouth on the southeast coast of England. She says that her godfather has a cabin there that sits within a tract of wooded land called the New Forest, and she decided to spend a few weeks there with her Malamute called Sky. On the very first day that she arrived, she decided to take some photos of the area to show her mother, and she found her way to a field with horses, along with her dog, at around 11 a.m. It is here where she would have an odd experience, when something began to call her name from the surrounding trees. And she would say this: "So I'm taking photos of wild horses, and I hear, 'Hey, come here,' seemingly to come to the right of me. I look, and that part of the forest is deeper, and I couldn't see anything standing or hiding that way. Sky, on the other hand, heard it and jerked that way on the lead. 'Come closer, this way.' I focused myself now to look through the trees and long grass, and there was now a simple stone path that weirdly didn't have any grass or growth around it. I could clearly see a cobbled path. So, Sky and I started making our way down that path. I didn't notice anything at the time, but I could clearly hear Sky whimpering and nothing else. It was like all the other sound was muted. I know I'm not making any sense typing this out, and I'm sorry, but it was like everything else around me, the birds, the wind, and trees, were just fading away, and I was in some weird sort of haze. 'Just a bit farther,' a woman's voice whispered to us while giggling. Sky then shook me out of my trance by stopping, putting her hackles up and growling at something. I shook my head, and suddenly the haze and confusion had disappeared. We were still on the path, but I had a very weird sense of dread starting to creep over me, and we ran back to the clearing we had come from. 'Come back!' a woman screamed at us as it seemed to follow and echo around us as we both were running back. We made it to the clearing and back to the cabin. I double-locked all the doors and pulled the curtains and blinds over the windows due to the fact that I thought we were being followed, and whatever or whoever wanted us down that path so badly would come back for us. But they never did. I checked my phone straight away, as I now had service and was connected to the Wi-Fi. Multiple calls and texts all came through at once. Tons asking where we were, did we arrive safe, and my boyfriend asking me why he hadn't heard from me. We were only in the woods for what seemed like an hour and mere seconds on that path, but it was now 9 p.m., and I have no recollection of the missing time we had encountered. In another case, we have Reddit user Lewis Analog, who had his own experience while out hiking in the Grand Tetons National Park in northwestern Wyoming. On this occasion, he was out with 4 friends in 2017, taking their annual road trip, along which they stopped at the Grand Tetons to stay for a couple of days. While they were there, they made plans to hike along some of the less traveled trails of the area, deciding to try out a 13-mile hike called the Two Ocean and Emma Matilda Lakes Outside Loop. They departed in the morning hours on a clear day and made it to the first lake without incident, stopping there to take a break and enjoy the scenery. As they looked around the majestic wilderness all around them, something very bizarre began to happen when the weather suddenly became dark and ominous, and whereas it had been clear just moments before, there were now clouds and rain coming down. Oddly, this weather passed just as suddenly, but they didn't think much of it at the time. They then continued until they came upon an anomalous trail that did not appear in their maps, and they decided to check it out. And this is where things would get very strange. The witness says, "After a few more miles, the trail became extremely narrow, and the forest on either side became very thick, like the thickest forest you've ever seen. I remember remarking that it looked like Blair Witch Country, and the forest almost seemed to consume the trail. It's at this point walking along the trail that myself and one friend who was in front of the pack distinctly heard a clear, loud, and audible woman's voice. It sounded as if a woman was maybe 15 meters ahead of us around the bend and speaking to someone else. We continued walking, and when we got around the bend, we were stunned to see nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck immediately stood up, and we looked at each other in shock and reiterated that we had definitely heard a woman. The other 3 guys then approached and asked us if we were okay because we were pale, and we told them what we had heard. They then told us that they too had heard a woman as they approached, and they thought that the 2 of us were ahead and had been talking to a fellow hiker. We all looked around frantically, but the forest had turned silent. There was no wind, and everything seemed to be going slowly. And the weird thing was, there was one very tall tree about 50 meters from us, which was swaying from side to side. But as I said, there was no wind, and the forest was silent. It wasn't just moving slightly, but as if it was caught in a large gust. The clouds had blown back over and were an ominous gray, and we all just kind of looked at each other, and after calling out a few times to make sure there wasn't an injured hiker around, we began hiking relatively fast, away from that spot. And over the next 8-ish miles, we saw just one other person near the trailhead, and a bear, but that was the only part of the trail where we all felt uncomfortable. We then talked about it later that night after getting back to camp, and couldn't make any sense of what we had heard. To this day, it still stumps me, and gives me goosebumps." The witness then went on to say that they perhaps came very close to vanishing, like many others in national parks, and wonders if there was a cluster of such disappearances in that area at the time. This next account comes from a Reddit user, GCM801719. At the time, he says he had gone out on a short hike in the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont, around the base of Mount Glastonbury, hoping to take a look at the remains of an old ghost town and railroad bed from the 19th century. He was not alone at the time, as he brought along his dog named BB, and when they stopped along a logging road to take the trail in, the weather was sunny and clear, but as they began to hike along, he says that he began to hear an eerie whistling sound that immediately had his dog agitated and pulling at the leash in an effort to run off into the trees. He had the distinct impression that the whistle was meant to draw the dog away from him, but after a few minutes there were no more sounds, and he tried to put the odd incident out of his mind and continue the hike. However, this strange whistling was just the beginning, and he describes what happened next. Not 10 steps later, I heard a woman's voice from the other side of the trail. She said, "Hello? Come here. We're just off the trail." Then I heard what sounded like the playful laughter of another woman. The tone of the calls was very playful and almost seductive. "Hello, come down here. What's your name?" I was curious and even a little intrigued to check it out, as the voice was very pleasant, but after a split second, I stopped myself from moving. Looking to the left where the voices were coming from, I could almost see a path through the trees and down the ridge. It was a perfectly straight line. There was no noise, not even the rustling of leaves or chirping of birds. I started to feel lightheaded and confused. BB barked again, and I snapped out of it. A feeling of complete dread then overtook me, and I reached into my pocket and pulled the Ruger LC9 that I had in a pocket holster out and held the pistol to my side and clicked the safety off. As soon as I did that, I began to hear things again, leaves rustling and the sounds of birds tweeting. Looking to the left again, the path that had just been there was now gone. After that, I decided to end my hike, and we booked it back to the car without incident. But the strangest thing was yet to come. When I got back to my car and drove off the mountain and had cell phone service again, my phone had been blowing up with missed messages from my girlfriend and brother asking where I was and why I wasn't back yet. I checked the time on my phone, and it was 4 p.m. I had started my hike around 8 a.m. I'd been gone for 8 hours and could only account for a couple of those hours of time. To this day, I have no explanation of what happened, and I don't hike anymore, and ended up taking up golf. From Ask Reddit, there is an account from a witness who says that this happened when he was a kid on a camping trip with his parents, along with another family. At the time of his strange experience, he had been out playing with some other kids near the campground, but got into an argument with another boy and decided to walk back by himself. He took a U-shaped path that was around the campground and had woods on either side. He then explains the series of events that would play out. He says, "At the very center of this U is a park. Perfect, I think. I'll sit on the swings until I think enough time has passed and I'll go back. As I'm on the swings, I notice a path directly in front of me. I get up and start walking along this dirt path. There are reeds on either side of me, and I have my hands stretched out as I walk dead center of this path. My hands can just barely touch these reeds unless I move closer to one side. I walk for about 10 minutes maybe, and I get to this pond. It was crystal clear water, and I have this urge to drink it. It looks so refreshing. I kneel down, and suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck go straight up. It was like I snapped back into myself. What am I doing? Why am I about to drink pond water? And why did I walk down this path? I start to feel really uneasy, so I turn around and start walking the same way that I came. Let me clarify. There was only one path. It was straight, and I had made no turns. I didn't walk around this pond. I simply walked to the end of the path, got freaked out about something, and turned around. But suddenly, all types of bugs were now around. I kept walking and I noticed the dirt path is getting more and more narrow. The reeds and tall grass are now at my arms, and there's a constant buzzing feeling in my ears from these bugs. The path gets so narrow that I have to walk sideways to avoid the reeds. I yell out, "Help!" and I hear a voice ask if I'm okay. I replied that I'm lost, and a woman says, "Just walk straight, honey. I see you." I see nothing. It's just tall grass and reeds, but I walk a few feet, and I see the road. I am scratched from head to toe, and there's a woman by the playground asking what had happened. She takes a Kleenex out of her pocketbook and starts wiping some of the scratches, and I tell her what had happened. I look behind me, and I see no path. I'm at the same park. I'm in front of the swing I was just on. The woman looks at me and tells me that I shouldn't even think about it, and to just forget about it, because I'm fine now. But she really emphasizes that I shouldn't talk about it. I've always been on the fence about it, and I'm sure that there was one path in and one path out. The bugs could have steered me off course, and maybe I'm being paranoid. Or there was something more sinister that nearly trapped me for good. In another story by a poster called Josh Aldana Music 417, it seems as if some sort of entity was trying to draw him away. He says that this happened during a hike with his father at Mount Shasta in Northern California when he was just a kid. The hike started off normally enough, but they would encounter some oddities along the way, such as a group of boulders arranged in a circle that they had never noticed there before. They then passed another group of hikers who were headed down the steep incline, but when they looked back, he says the hikers were farther down the trail than they should have been in such a short amount of time. It was a little disconcerting, but they just sort of shrugged their shoulders and continued on. And this is where things get even more bizarre. And the witness would say this. As we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time, there was far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued on the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach up to the top of the cliff. We reached a point where we would need climbing gear to continue, so we decided to head back. When we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks, staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost as if he had none, almost like his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed him out to my dad, and then the man quickly ducked behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It seemed almost playful, like a child trying to hide. Then for a few moments, I was out of it, and I have no recollection of what was going on. According to my dad, I just started walking towards the man in the hat. My dad was calling to me, Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going? And then I came to. I was standing right at the edge of a cliff. It was a huge drop, enough to kill me or seriously injure me at least. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail. He told me to stay put, and my dad went down to the boulders to search for the man. But he wasn't there. There was nowhere for him to go except up or down the trail, and it didn't make any sense. He had just disappeared. I have no idea what was going on the trail, and I have no explanation for it. I've told this many times to family and friends, and no one has an explanation. I've done research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat, and I've also read that the Native American tribes from that area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe it could act as a portal to other dimensions, and that it's guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone to try to go up the volcano. In other cases still, it seems like the forest is actively trying to keep people from leaving. From the Missing 411 forum, we have a poster called Bappo the Mighty, who says that this happened when he was a teenager at camp. At one point during the trip, he went off into the woods with two girls named Amy and Harriet, exploring the area. And while nothing particularly unusual happened when they were out there, things took a sinister turn when they decided to head back to camp. And the witness explains what happened. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed as though our path was non-existent in the first place, almost like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees that we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought was the correct direction while shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest and splitting it into two. But we didn't follow the road, as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road that we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple Regatta Outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for a direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for about an hour and a half. She said that she had never seen us before, but she said that there was another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice, and eventually came back to our campsite. The leader, named Ian, could see that the three of us were all shaken up, and he confusingly stated that we'd only been gone for about 25 minutes, and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones had said that we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, kind of like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't really apply to. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was unlike anything I've heard of or experienced before. It literally was like we had been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. As always, we'll be coming back to the topic of the almost missing. And in the meantime, I'd love to hear about any and all experiences that you or someone that you know may have had regarding these strange phenomena. If you've witnessed something that you can't explain and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday with our next episode. From all of us at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.